Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ali Jalali. I'm a distinguished professor of international relations at the NESA Center, National Defense University. And today, I would like to talk about one issue, which is a topical issue, as usually in the news, and that's Afghanistan's changing dynamics of peace and conflict. As the world increasingly become embroiled in the struggle to counter the coronavirus pandemic and face the resulting economic slowdown, Afghanistan actually enters a new uncertain time. The global emergency resulting from the pandemic is going to and expected to have a deep and extensive impact on a litany of challenges that Afghanistan faces today. These challenges are, we have many challenges in the country, but four are very important that can actually will have fateful impact on the future of the country. These are resolving the domestic impact caused by the dispute over the presidential elections. Then you have to look at how the insurgency and terrorism is going on in the country and what is the response of the country and its allies to that. And the third challenge is the economic decline partly caused by the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic that's hitting the country. And finally, how to put this peace process on track. These challenges are all connected to one another. They influence each other. They are dependent on one another. So resolving one is not going to resolve others. There's a need for a comprehensive approach and addressing all these challenges together, because the domestic impact, the impasse actually affects the war on terrorism. The war on terrorism at the same time as affecting the economy of the country because of security, lack of security. And then the putting the security or putting the peace process on track requires these other elements, other challenges to be addressed too. So they are interconnected. And the weakest link in this chain actually defines the speed of progress. Optimistically, a comprehensive approach by domestic, regional, and international actors who are involved in Afghanistan can find ways to find a kind of solution for bringing stability back to Afghanistan. However, uncoordinated efforts by other actors can actually lead to a spiral that can cause more problems, more instability in a country that is not stranger to difficult times and enduring problems. Let me talk briefly about each one of these challenges and how we see them and how these challenges affect Afghanistan, and also the international community. We look at the domestic impasse in Afghanistan. Afghanistan held the presidential election in September, 8 months ago. The results of these elections were announced by the Independent Election Commission in February, which announced President Ghani, who was for re-election, as the winner with a very small margin. His principal rival, Dr. Abdullah, disputed the results and announced himself as the winner of the election. Both these gentlemen actually uh, held oath of office ceremonies as the president of Afghanistan. That created a major impasse and constitutional crisis in Afghanistan. And that would affect every other effort by Afghans, by the international community, by the United States, by the NATO, to deal with the other challenges that I mentioned in Afghanistan. So many international mediators, Afghans, try to resolve this impasse, including Secretary Pompeo, who traveled to Afghanistan, to Kabul, and tried to do this, even warned that if the Afghan leaders cannot get together and form an inclusive government, the United States is ready to cut $1 billion of its aid and also consider other cuts in the future. That was a very, very strong warning. At the same time, inside Afghanistan, people were really disappointed with the division in the country, with two leaders, each claiming to be the president. Actually, caused the government to be very weak, and many urgent issues could not be addressed effectively. So after so many months, after 8 months, only yesterday, the two leaders, after mediation from the international partners and also Afghans, agreed to unify the political leadership in the country and form an inclusive government in which President Ghani will remain as a president, and Dr. Abdullah will lead the peace process and national reconciliation, and also will appoint 50% of President Ghani's cabinet. This is something which happened yesterday and was welcomed by the United States, welcomed by the European Union, welcomed by NATO, the main partners of Afghanistan, and also welcomed by many other countries, including Iran, Turkey, and India. We will see what happens in the future. However, just writing or signing an agreement cannot resolve all the problems. Afghanistan has a bad experience of the national unity government, which came to power after the disputed elections in 2014. Therefore, people still have questions whether this deal would not. That all depends. I think the major question is here that the two leaders can balance two things. One, to maintain the unity, and at the same time to govern effectively. It means that unity should not be sacrificed for effectiveness, and effectiveness not sacrificed for maintaining unity. That's going to be seen. And also, there are many partners in the country, including the neighbors of Afghanistan, are hoping that they will work with the new setup in Kabul. This is one major challenge that Afghanistan actually faces today. The other challenge that I mentioned earlier is the fighting insurgency and terrorism. Despite the peace agreement between the United States and Taliban on 28th of February, the violence in Afghanistan has continued. According to Afghan sources, since the February agreement, on 28th of February, the agreement of peace between Taliban and the United States, the Taliban has launched more than 3,700 attacks across the country in Afghanistan. And according to US sources, during this period, close to 700 pro-government security forces were killed, and 2,050 civilians were killed in that. So the violence has continued. And this violence has actually culminated in the two major attacks just this week on 11th and 12th of May, where one attack was at a maternity hospital in Kabul, killing even newborn children, And another attack in the funeral in Jalalabad, which in Nangarhar province, which killed 24 people. These two elements actually uh, became the cause of a new strategy for the Afghan government, that they resumed offensive operation against the Taliban. Whether this situation will change the battleground situation is not clear. The strategic stalemate is still there, and therefore we don't know what will happen. However, as the violence continues, the peace process will suffer. Now, if the Afghan government forces continue offensive against the Taliban, so far they were only in defensive positions, then it is not known whether the US forces will also participate or not, because by the understanding between Afghanistan and the US forces, when there is attack on Afghan forces, the US forces will support the Afghan security forces. If that happens, this means the US will go back to combat actions. Will this entice Taliban attack? If that is Taliban attack, then the withdrawal of the US forces, which is scheduled to be completed in 14 months, will come under question. These are all questions that actually exacerbates the situation in Afghanistan and bring new problems on the battlefield. The United States, NATO, European Union, and many other countries called on Taliban to have at least reduce the violence, or a ceasefire, temporary ceasefire during this month of Ramadan. But so far they have not done that. Well, it is not expected that the Taliban will stop violence until they get their way during the elections, because violence is the only leverage they have. And the Afghan government does not have a choice but to respond. So violence is expected to continue, even when the peace negotiation begins with the Afghans and the Taliban. The third issue that the challenge actually I thought was that how the coronavirus pandemic affects the economy in Afghanistan. The Afghan economy has actually faces many problems. The government does not have sufficient revenue to budget its operational and development programs. The Afghan budget, both operational and development, is mostly dependent on foreign aid and foreign grants and foreign debts. 90% of this budget is actually provided by outside assistance. 5.5 billion is the on budget expenses this year of Afghanistan, of which only 2 billion is provided by Afghan revenues. And then the cost of the security forces is at 5.5 billion, which 90% of it is also provided by international partners. So now the coronavirus is further will affect the economic decline in the country. The growth rate of Afghanistan in 2019, last year, by World Bank was estimated as 2.9%, which was not bad. And that is possible because of the recovery from so many years of drought, mostly by the revenue what came from agriculture sector. But with the coronavirus, major cities of Afghanistan are on lockdown now. The borders are closed. Export-import is actually virtually stopped. And many people are out of work. The unemployment rate of Afghanistan actually before was close to 40%, is going to decline even more. And that is going to contract the Afghan economy further. According to estimate of the the World Bank, Afghanistan economy was contract 4% more this year. So if nothing else, economic decline can affect the problems in Afghanistan, including the peace process, the insurgency, and security across the country. And then finally, we'll talk about how to put the peace process on track. The peace process is the key to resolution of Afghan problems. There's many solutions, and only through a peace, to return of peace and stability in Afghanistan and its supporters can address other issues of domestic problems, domestic political problems, of economic problems, and also the insurgency and terrorism problems. The peace process in Afghanistan is actually a roadmap to eventual achievement of peace in Afghanistan. It started with the U.S. Taliban peace agreement in Doha, Qatar, on 28th of February. Now the question is that the peace process as the aim of bringing stability to Afghanistan. Why the peace is signed between Taliban and the United States, not Afghanistan government and Taliban? Well, there is a reason for it. The document or the deal that's signed between U.S. and Taliban is actually as a leverage to get Taliban to talk to the Afghan government. For years, the Taliban put a condition on peace talks that they will not talk peace with the Afghan government until U.S. forces leave Afghanistan or foreign troops leave Afghanistan. So using that leverage, the United States, in fact, signed this deal with the Taliban, which has 4 parts. The first is that the Taliban will pledge that they will tear ties with all terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda, and will not allow terrorist groups to establish bases in their territory or launch attacks on the United States or allies. In exchange, the United States pledged to withdraw its military forces in 14 months from Afghanistan, including the 5,000 troops that would leave in 135 days, which actually is 15th of July. By 15th of July, more than 5,000 U.S. troops will be withdrawn from Afghanistan, leaving there between 7,000 to 8,000 troops in the country. And the rest will be withdrawn in the next 10 months or so. The other part of this deal is that the Taliban will engage in peace talks with the Afghan government and other Afghan groups to chart out the future of Afghanistan and bring peace to the country. And finally, that they will agree to have a comprehensive ceasefire. These 4 elements are the part of the documents signed by the United States and Taliban in February. Now, the major issue is the implementation. The implementation is the major problem. So far, the agreement, when it was signed on 28th of February, was predicated that Taliban will start the intra-Afghan dialogue with the Afghan government on 10th of March, 10 days later. But now we see we are in the middle of February and the talks has not started. The longer the talks delays, the more violence will continue in country, and also it will affect the withdrawal of the U.S. forces from Afghanistan. Why the talks could not start on the 10th of March? During the agreement in Doha, there was two unwritten pledges. One was by the Taliban that they will reduce the violence when they start the talks with the Afghan government, the 10th of March. On the other hand, there was another unwritten agreement by the United States that they will work with the Afghan government to free about 5,000 prisoners of Taliban before the beginning of the dialogue with the Taliban, and the Taliban would free 1,000 prisoners that they have in their custody. However, these two pledges were not fulfilled. First of all, with the Afghan government. The Afghan government refused to free 5,000 Taliban at once, but instead said the freeing of the prisoners is part of the negotiations. They could free 100 Taliban per day for 15 days. That will be 15 Taliban. And after that, when the talks between Taliban and the Afghan government begins, then they will free 500 Taliban every week until they free all the remaining 3,500 prisoners. The Taliban did not stop their violence. They did not want to start talk with the Afghan government, and they said until the prisoners are freed, we will not start talking with the Taliban, with the Afghan government. So far, only 1,000 Taliban had freed, and 4,000 are still in custody, the one that they wanted to be freed. And Taliban also freed about 100, 150 people and Afghan security forces members they had in their custody. Now the problem is that both sides are creating hurdles in the beginning of the negotiation of talks. The longer this delay continues, more problems can emerge, more people can be killed, more problems. And then, at the same time, you have another elements involved in violence in Afghanistan. That's Daesh. That's ISIS Khorasan, was the Khorasan branch of the Islamic State. The Taliban believe the assumption was this, that Taliban and the Afghan government would both fight the ISIS, the Daesh, and Daesh continues to attack targets in Afghanistan. The Afghan government does not make a distinction between Daesh and Taliban now. They believe many of these attacks were conducted by the Taliban, but Taliban denied that they were not involved in the recent attacks on the maternity hospital and the funeral gathering in Nangarhar. The U.S. announced that the recent attacks was perpetrated by Daesh, and the Taliban and Afghan both should fight the Daesh. Daesh is another element in the violence in Afghanistan. Unless the Afghan government and Taliban cannot reach an agreement, peace agreement, Daesh can use the situation and continue attacks not only in Afghanistan, but also beyond the country. Now, with the implementation, with the delays, the other issue is how to monitor the commitment that Taliban made and to also synchronize it with other elements of the peace. The transaction between the U.S. and Taliban regarding the commitments that they made are at uneven level of control. The United States commitment is very forthright. Withdrawal of its forces from Afghanistan, it's already begun. And so it's visible, it's been controlled. But on the other hand, Taliban's commitment that did not allow the terrorist groups to use the Afghan territory against the U.S. and U.S. allies, is a very complex and uncertain. How you monitor this? On the other hand, Taliban do not control all of the territories in Afghanistan. According to the U.S. Sources, the Pentagon sources, from 407 districts in Afghanistan, 50 of these districts are under control of the Taliban, which makes 13.5%. Then 138 districts, which makes about 33.9%, are disputed areas. Both government forces and Taliban can operate there. Sometimes they get engaged in seesaw battles. One comes, the other one pushes away, and they come back. And then the rest 209 districts, which makes 53.8% of the territory, is under full control of the Afghan government. How Taliban can make this commitment while the U.S. forces are leaving? This gives the Taliban an opportunity to calibrate their agreement, their commitment as the U.S. forces leave. Since the U.S. Withdrawal is not contingent on progress in intra-Afghan peace negotiations, so the Taliban see it to their advantage that the intra-Afghan peace dialogue or negotiation delays, and the U.S. forces continues to withdraw from Afghanistan. This is a problem that is discussed everywhere, even in the United States too. Sometimes it is considered that the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan as condition-based, but in the documents that are signed, there's no such mention. It is calendar-based. So calendar-based withdrawal is considered to be an advantage to the Taliban. Therefore, the Afghan government criticizes this and also wants all elements of this the peace deal should be synchronized, and the withdrawal should be tempered by the progress in the Taliban engagement of the Afghan government and other forces for bringing peace to the country. The major issue with the implementation is whether the Taliban are ready to discuss the future of Afghanistan or to make peace and make a deal with faith, in good faith. The Taliban publicly claims that they are not going to monopolize power when they come. They want to be a share. They are the support sharing power in Afghanistan, and they say that they are also committed to respect the human rights in the context of the Islamic law. On the other hand, they also say that they are tired of war. War is not the solution. So these are publicly announced by the Taliban. On the other hand, privately, they celebrated the peace agreement with the United States is a victory over a superpower, a victory of driving out another superpower from Afghanistan. On the other hand, privately, they also want kind of a control on any social and political decision that will be made by the future of Afghan government. So it is not known. Afghans are very skeptical about this. How the Taliban will be actually committed to some of these issues. In the recent surveys in Afghanistan done by Asia Foundation, still reports that only 13% of Afghanistan population have some kind of sympathy with the Taliban. And the Taliban are considered threats twice more in rural areas than in urban areas. The rural areas where the Taliban are more visible, and more, and they have more influence. On the other hand, the majority of people want the Islamic Republic identity of Afghanistan to continue, not the Taliban's emirate to come back. So these are issues cannot be, judged until the real talks between Afghan government and the Taliban begins, and the real issues came to the fore. Until then, Pakistan will be non-committal because they do not want to lose control over their fighters in the battlefield. So they will continue to be vague about many issues, and only during the talks will the real demands of the Taliban will be revealed. So however, in Afghanistan, the other wild card is the regional powers and their influence in Afghanistan and their impact on the peace process. First of all, the two first-rate or the two major players in Afghanistan is the United States and Pakistan. The United States that is supporting Afghan government so far and also supporting Afghan government. In Pakistan, which has only harbored Taliban for years, supported them. Their infrastructures in Pakistan. In Islam, they did infrastructure there. Pakistan would like to have influence over them or actually use them as a leverage to get their way in Afghanistan. The United States want to end its long war in Afghanistan. In leaving a stable government that will be not that we able not to allow the terrorist groups to use Afghanistan territory against the United States and its allies. At the same time, Pakistan has the influence certain strategic geopolitical influence in Afghanistan is a hallmark of Pakistan policy for a long time. In the 15 years they were following this policy. So therefore, they have specifically do not want Indian influence in Afghanistan, which is arch enemy. They want they want the border issues with Afghanistan to be solved. Afghanistan does not recognize the Durand line, which is the border now between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And Pakistan is also not happy with the Afghanistan government support of the Pashtun and Baloch activism in Pakistan territory. Pakistan also complained about the hydroelectric dams on Kabul River basin waterways, which actually support waters to Pakistan. So these, on the other hand, Pakistan seeing that the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan will create a vacuum. They want to have a leverage there in order to secure their strategic and security interests. So these interests, unless Pakistan sees that these interests are not guaranteed, they will continue to support Taliban and will be behind the Taliban and will actually create problems in the way of peace in Afghanistan. These two are the first rank of the actors. The second rank are India and Iran. India is against the influence of Taliban in Afghanistan, which is by extension as the influence of Pakistan and Iran. On the other hand, India sees that the Pakistan is using extremist groups in the fight in Kashmir. With the peace in Afghanistan, they have more people to use them in Kashmir against Indian in Kashmir conflict. At the same time, India has economic interests in Afghanistan. Through Afghanistan, they went to Central Asia. India now, with Afghanistan and Iran, has established this route Chabahar port of Iran, through which the Iranian transit or trade goes from India to Chabahar in Iran and then through Afghanistan to Central Asia. Then Iran, as also, although some of Iran's interest in Afghanistan is parallel to the U.S. interest, but Iran has two common interests with Taliban. One is opposition to the presence of the U.S. in Afghanistan. The other one is Iran sees Taliban a more moderate militants against the Daesh, who are the harsh the rivals against the Shia groups in the region. So therefore, Iran wants to have some kind of influence in Afghanistan, as they tried in the past, and therefore Iran has established relationship with Taliban so far. These relationships are not ideological; they are political and security. They believe that when Taliban comes to Afghanistan or share power in Afghanistan, they want to have an influence over them. Although Iran does not want Taliban to be the sole power in Afghanistan, but part of a coalition government. Further, Iran has a problem issues with Afghanistan and the water sources, the Helmand. Despite the agreement, the treaty that Afghanistan and Iran made in 1997 treaty over the decision of the Helmand River water, Iran still continues to oppose the building of hydroelectric dams in the Nimruz province in southeastern Afghanistan, in the Salma Dam, and the Lirot River in the north. The Afghan refugees in Pakistan, in Iran, and also the flow of drugs to Iran from Afghanistan are issues that actually affects the relationship between the two countries. And Iran wants the United States out of Afghanistan, and also wants inclusive government in Afghanistan that will not harbor, or that will be able to fight the Daesh and other elements, and that pose threat to Iran. And then the third group, it comes great powers, Russia and China, mainly. Russia actually supported the United States in overthrowing the Taliban. But the years after the transition, after the withdrawal of these forces, and the Taliban's emergence as a major power in Afghanistan politics, Russia established a relationship with Taliban. They want Taliban to be part of the government in the future, and also to be an instrument in fighting Daesh and other extremist groups that actually have attack targets in Central Asia, or at least undermine security in Central Asia. On the other hand, Russia does not want permanent presence of the United States in Afghanistan, and therefore, even last week in the SEO conference, the foreign minister of Russia warned that we want the implementation of the Doha peace process, no other secret agreements in the region, and an inclusive government of Afghanistan that will also consider the legitimate interests of its neighbors. And China's interests are twofold in Afghanistan. One is the counter-terrorism, which is common to all countries, because China has a terrorism problem in the western Xinjiang or autonomous region, the East Turkestan Islamic movement, which some of the elements are seen in Afghanistan. And on the other hand, it's economic. China wants unhindered implementation of its China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, which passes through Pakistan, Baluchistan to the Wagah, to the Pakistani border, Pakistani port. at the same time, China's interest is extension of its the Belt Road Initiative and embracing Afghanistan in that project. Now, with all these actors, some of them have legitimate or sometimes opportunistic interest. How can this problem can be resolved of Afghanistan? There are three issues that, in conclusion, I would like to emphasize. First, Afghanistan is on the verge of another transition that could lead either to a peaceful and stable future or descent into yet another cycle of violence. The challenges are great and evolving. The political context is changing, and uncertainties are compounding. The US-Taliban peace agreement provides the basis for a process to bring peace in Afghanistan through direct talks among the Afghans. Its success, however, depends on its full implementation in close synchronization of different elements of the process, including a comprehensive ceasefire, withdrawal of foreign forces from Afghanistan, the removal of the Taliban sanctuaries in Pakistan territory, progress in the peace talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government, and long-term assistance to Afghanistan to ensure that the foreign troops withdrawal does not lead to collapse of the government or economic disaster. And third, such a solution, however, can hardly be sustained without the positive and constructive interaction of Afghanistan neighbors, other regional players, and the great powers whose direct and indirect engagement in Afghanistan has shaped the current situation in the country. Cooperation, not competition, is the key word to stave off the fallout of the great power in regional actors' competition and to avoid third-party influence over bilateral relationship with Afghanistan. These are the three major consequences that we see in Afghanistan that can bring either peace or plunge Afghanistan once again into a chaos. Thank you very much.